Okay. So basically the problem is, what are they going to do to you at sentencing? Well, if you still do the confession and avoidance and you're in honor, and the evidence clearly shows that you're not only in honor in the procedure, but you're in honor in the substance, there ought to be a discharge of the case, a settlement and closure, and you ought to go home. Because if they damage a living soul after he's done the confession and avoidance and it has not been rebutted, then they've committed the ultimate legal crime. But as long as they only badmouth the fiction, which is their creation, and they send the living soul home, then sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. If they sentence you, they've applied the rod or the sticks and stones to you. But if they found the defendant guilty and lashed out at you, but then said, but you can go home now, all they've done is called you names. They haven't applied sticks and stones to you, so their actions are not illegal or unlawful, nor did they damage you. But they have totally matricized the public. They're totally confused as to what's going on. They're living in a cocoon, in a deep sleep, in a program of the public. And that's what they're doing. Your confession should be colorable. Your avoidance ought to be colorable. There can't be too much black and white, because remember, their courts can't handle the truth. They can't handle black and white. There was another very interesting thing that came out this week, thanks to my friend Nick, and I really appreciate him from time to time, because he calls up and we get involved in all these crazy discussions, and one particular short discussion this week was absolutely incredible. I'm sure everybody in here is familiar with the scriptural concept of Sabbath. How many Sabbaths are there? One per week. There is a weekly Sabbath. There is special Sabbaths. But there is a yearly Sabbath in the 7th year. And then there is a 50-year Sabbath, which is a Jubilee. So basically there are 3 Sabbaths. There are the weekly Sabbaths, including the special days, the yearly Sabbaths, and the Jubilee. Well, the festivals are your daily Sabbaths that come between the regular Sabbaths. Depends on your calendar. Most of the time in the Jewish calendar, they fall midweek. The 7th year Sabbath is the release of the individual from his debt. And the 50-year Sabbath, the Jubilee, is the release of the commercial debts of the nation domestically. And then under war conditions, there is a 70-year release of debt when it's international. Now, everything that deals with money, everything that deals with the redemption model and concept that we've been looking at, shows that the people should have been released from their debts on a 7-year basis. And in fact, under the common law, most of the contracts, including mortgages, never extended beyond 7 years. This nation, from the get-go, practiced slavery. Slavery is not illegal or unlawful. However, if you hold personal slaves, you must release them in the 7th year. And this nation never practiced its commercial law of slavery pursuant to Scripture by the 7-year release. Neither has this nation ever practiced the 7th year of the rest of the land. as a national basis. And in fact, in Scripture, if you remember in the New Testament, there was a time in which there was discussion between the Messiah and even some of the disciples of how many times must you forgive your brother. And the scribes and Pharisees had said you had to forgive them 7 times. And then at a particular discussion between the Messiah and Peter, it came up, you must release them 7 times 70, which is 490, which happens to be 10 jubilees, 10 being the law, jubilee being the rest. If the children of Israel as a nation ever fell into dishonor against God, how many years would the children of Israel be allowed to stay in that dishonor before they usually got called down? Many times it was 10 jubilees, which was 490 years. Jubilee is really 49 years. Jubilee is the tail end of the 49th year, which is why you were 770s. Now, in 10 jubilees, how many rest years should the land have had? 70. And how much is the international debt penalty for a nation? 70 years. That's because you've gone 10 jubilees and screwed up. And so your penalty is that God said, if you will not allow the land to rest, I will put you in a penalty and the land will get its rest. So you went for 10 jubilees, your land never rested, so you owe 70 years of rest. So the Father would put you into a wood or an iron yoke captivity for 70 years so the land would get its rest. That's how that works. Okay? Now, what is the one thing that you are not supposed to do in the Sabbath year? Work. Excuse me, is it bad to work? For instance, at one time, wasn't the Messiah and the disciples going through the grape vineyard, gathering grapes and eating them? And what did the scribes and Pharisees start yelling and screaming? Violation of the Sabbath. Were they violating the Sabbath? No. They were kind of working to a certain extent, but what was the issue? Remember, when you work in one of 2 ways. How do you work? Love, which is serve, or to sell your labor. What don't you do on the Sabbath? Sell your labor, which is commerce. So, the Sabbath is free of commerce. Okay, those that are into eschatological studies in Scripture know that in the last 1,000 years, there is a special condition in which God's people are supposed to be with Him in that special terms and condition. Now, the way that the timing of the history of the earth was set up, you had about 4,000 years of Old Testament, you've gone through 2,000 years of New Testament, and that's 6 periods of 1,000 years, which could well put us into the first of the 7,000th year period. Each 1,000 years is as 1 day. So we're entering into the 7th day after the millennium in 2000. What are we not supposed to do in that 1,000 year millennium? sell your labor, all commerce, was to stop in the year 2000. Is that why these prepaid accounts and all this stuff has come out now to the knowledge of some of the people? What happens if you're still trying to sell your labor and become involved in commerce in the 7th millennium day or year? You're in violation of the concept of commerce. And so once again, we've been saying that the ultimate goal, if you understand what's going on, is to do what? Completely be out of commerce. Because if you're in commerce, you're in violation of the millennium Sabbath. Which gives you an interesting spiritual background and connotation on what's going on. And that's popped up since the year 2000. We're in the 3rd year of the 1,000-year sabbatical millennium. And so once again you have an indicator that's pointing to this concept that it's commerce that is getting us into trouble. And remember, this is just one indicator because we've already talked about the concept of the rule of 93, where it said that if you're doing business with a debtor to the creditor, that you are also a debtor to that creditor. And so all of the states and the United States are in debt to the international bankers. And as such, when we try to do commerce within the domestic purview here, we've become debtors just like the straw man that they've created. So we've all become the bad guys of necessity that are living in the matrix, and we all think we're living people leading the lives that in reality we're only dreaming we're leading because we're asleep in the matrix. The one interesting thing that the actors in the Matrix commented about in some of those articles was the brilliance that the Wachowski brothers have. And they said from the beginning that they believed, the Wachowski brothers believed, that the Matrix was a real story about real issues. And that if the actors themselves couldn't see it as a bigger part of an overall picture of what was going on in the real world, that probably they didn't have the mindset to be personifying the characters in the story. Now, in line of where that has gone and went, there is, my friend Ed Bradley, by the way, does send his love and appreciation to this group. Ed Bradley, many of you probably don't know him, but Ed Bradley is been in jail along with 2 of his sons for a number of years on a income tax charge. And his wife Betsy has just had an awful lot to deal with. She's done a fantastic job, and it's been the contributions where we've taken a collection from time to time from our group, which has helped them get by. So Ed sends his love and appreciation, and within a couple of weeks he's going to be out. And he will be at a halfway house, I believe, and then probably by midsummer, I believe he'll be home. So he sends thank you. He had Ben Hoke send me a transcript of a newsletter. Now let me see which one am I trying to find here. And this newsletter is taxtruthnews.com. And the interesting thing that Ed saw in this newsletter, in this taxtruthNewsletter.com, this is the April 8th, 2003 edition, volume 3, issue 7. And I'm not trying to plagiarize anybody's anything. I'll publicize it if you're interested in it. Try to get with these people and sign up. I think you can get it on the web at taxtruthnews.com, all lower letter, no spaces between the words, or 727-824-7747 is a phone call. And I don't know if this is part of Eddie Kahn's material or if he's just featured in a couple of articles. Apologize for not knowing more about this newsletter. But Edgar said it was very interesting because in this particular newsletter, Eddie Kahn was talking about a couple of things, but then it went on to interview a patriot named Dave Hinkson. Anybody in here know or not know who he is? Dave Hinkson is more known out western United States than he is back east. He had news radio program out of Las Vegas for a while. Currently, he's up in Idaho. A lot of you people may know Dave because he has done a lot of the colloidal mineral suspensions, and he's got a website. Let me see if I can locate that real quick. And with that website, you can get a hold of not only just colloidal silver and colloidal gold. He's got colloidal everything. Wateroz is the name of his group. And you can email him at DHINKSON, Dave Hinkson at wateroz.com. He's probably got a website. It's not in here, but it probably comes up with the name Wateroz somehow or another. You may be interested in that because even though colloidal silver has a lot of bacteriological traits, there are many other trace minerals that in colloidal form the body is in desperate need of to stay in a healthy capacity, and the colloidal suspensions that his company did was a very good way of absorbing them into your system. He had colloidal gold, which gives you a euphoric attitude. It's kind of like against a lot of the depressions. He's got potassium, he's got sodium, he's got and every one of those trace minerals has certain malnutritions, diseases, and things that it helps prevent and overcome. In any event, Dave Hinkson has always been a fighter, which is why we at Right Way knew him, because he was always combating everybody, and of course he wanted to learn what we were teaching at the time when we were teaching everybody to fight too. And so this article talks about some of the approach that Dave Hinkson recommends in his current status, and his current status is he was arrested. And once again, because they get him about every year or 2 years or more often to just harass him and see what he knows. And he's telling the author of this Tax Truth newsletter a lot of facts. And I thought it would be a good teaching example to go over what it is that Dave's talking about in here and compare that to some of the things that we've been studying and looking at, so that in this comparison we can give you a pretty good idea of what we believe is not good ideas coming from him, but in some of the cases he's got some good ideas. So I'll go through some of this letter with your indulgence. It says, last month Eddie Kahn told us about something interesting that he gleaned from Dan Metter. Do people know who Dan Metter is? He's an IRS researcher from down in Oklahoma. He, along with our friend down in Cincinnati and a bunch of other people, have got a IRS Patriot board that they keep getting together and trying to theorize what it is IRS is or isn't doing. So Dan Metter's discussion group, for people who are unfamiliar with him, he's a good researcher who comes up with some great material every now and then. There was a court case that Mr. Metter talked about, which Eddie believes involves a man with whom the state charged with driving while intoxicated. When the man went into court, he said that he needed to have an attorney. However, he wanted any attorney representing him to sign an assistance of counsel contract with him. What's important here is that an assistance of counsel is not necessarily an attorney, according to Eddy. It relates to a provision found in the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution, which guarantees the right of assistance of counsel in criminal cases. When he talks about the Sixth Article and Amendment, and it says, evidently the man met with several attorneys seeking someone to represent him. However, none of them were willing to sign the contract to become his assistant of counsel. So what Eddy has been doing, he heard from us that you need to get a contract signed, put them on the private side, so now everybody's out trying to force these contracts on attorneys, and the attorneys won't sign them. So they go back to court and say, see there, we can't get a counsel of choice. So that's because the man wanted the prospective attorneys to assure him that they would protect and defend his constitutionally secured rights, that they had no other allegiances, and that the judge and the courts were properly qualified under the Constitution. They're asking them to do something that they can't do. It's an impossible act. That's why they won't sign it. An attorney's first allegiance is not to their client. Says who? That's on the public side if you've done nothing. Okay? It's to the court. Yeah, but who's the court? The people that are litigating. But then, if you are in warfare, you're an enemy, so you're not a member of the court, so then your case goes south. He goes on. That's why no attorney was able or willing to sign the assistance of counsel contract. So I guess that's a nullity now. It's no good. It won't work, right? The answer is wrong. Because what you end up doing all the time is you just lay on them a duty. And if they don't do what they're supposed to, what is this, television time or something? It looks like you ripped it. The bowed section. Oh man. How much is that going to cost the group for the room that Caleb's destroyed? Sorry about that. We'll get off Caleb's case. Back on the righty. Yeah, we'll charge him. We'll accuse him right to his face. He even fights with the clock. You got it. Therefore, whom could a man get as his assistance of counsel that would protect and defend his rights, they say. The important thing, yeah, Caleb. Caleb, are you busy next week? There's a lot of people that need you. The important thing here, according to Eddy, is that there is a Supreme Court ruling that says, quote, absent knowing and intelligent waiver, no person may be imprisoned for any offense, whether classified or petty, misdemeanor or felony, unless he was represented by counsel at his trial, unquote. Thus, if counsel does not represent you, then the government cannot imprison you for any reason. Now, that's absolutely true. So what does every judge in every criminal case do? Offer you counsel. And what does 99% of all the patriots do? Go, no, thank you. So what has the court just done? They've honored you, you've dishonored them, so therefore your whole issue of being no counsel to help represent you has gone right by the wayside. Don't worry about the appeal. You'll never win. You've dishonored them. Okay? So they don't understand that, but that's where they're going. Okay, the only exception to that is if the government can get you to knowingly and intelligently waive your right to have counsel. Therefore, the man described above said he needed counsel. We hear that when raising this issue, you must specifically say assistance of counsel. Okay, so who cares? Assistance of counsel? Counsel? Whatever. They gave you a lawyer. You didn't take them. You didn't honor them. So there you had it. And they'll usually say, we're going to make this guy stick there standby in case you change your mind. So the counsel issue just went down the tubes, whether they understand it or not. Okay, supposedly an assistance of counsel is someone who will adhere to all the rights afforded to you by the Constitution for the United States of America. The typical lawyer won't do that, though. That's conclusional law just because they never gave him an opportunity. They never drafted him and told him what to do. So how can they prove that he wouldn't do it? It's a presumption he won't. Because some patriot told him he's not going to help you. So your issue just went south. They will just have you plea bargain your rights away. Why are they going to have you plea bargain? Because your only remedy is confession and avoidance. And the patriots think that's terrible. I want my trial. You don't have a trial because there's no need for a trial because we don't have any money, so we can't do any execution. A trial's a waste of time. Plea bargain it out, and if you're honorable, you go home. But these people do not understand that. They say, because they won't let me have my trial, therefore the attorneys, the lawyers of the courts are crooked, evil, unpatriotic, da-da-dee-dee. And so what happens is they dishonor the court, so they go down the tubes. Now he says, over the past month, we followed the story of a Michigan woman, Rose Lear, who went on a hunger strike to protest her husband's willful failure to file conviction. Mrs. Lear's hunger strike stemmed from the belief that her husband, William Wallace Lear, was the victim of unlawful tax prosecution by the government. Her self-sacrifice was an attempt to compel the U.S. government to answer 537 true or false type questions regarding the federal income tax. Let me ask you a question. Is the federal income tax relevant to anything in the court? No. It's a game of honor, give honor, get honor. It's irrelevant. So why should they answer some questions? It's irrelevant. It won't help Mr. Lear. It won't hurt him. 537 true or false type questions regarding the federal income tax. She started the hunger strike on March 5th, 2001 after hand-delivering the question to 3 of her elected officials as a petition for redress grievance. A few days ago, though, we got word that her hunger strike ended last Wednesday, April 2nd, 2003. That must have been a typo. I don't think she was on hunger strike for 3 years. March 5th, 2003 to April 2nd, 2003, with a response from Mrs. Lear's Michigan Congressman Peter Hoekstra. However, the Congressman's response did not contain specific answers to each of the 537 questions. Why should they? It's irrelevant. As she wanted. Instead, it was just more avoidance by the government. Avoidance to what? The guy was dishonorable. He's in jail on a contempt. What's taxes got to do with it? Instead, it was just more avoidance by the government according to the We the People organization. The Congressman's response can be found online on their website at www.givemeLiberty.org/Lear/Hoekstra-response 4-02-03.pdf. The next day after Mrs. Lear stopped her hunger strike, she met with Congressman Hoekstra to hand-deliver a written rebuttal to his response. So it's not enough her husband was dishonoring him in the case by warfare. Now his wife is in warfare with the Congressman, trying to argue with the Congressman, as though that's going to give her husband a remedy. He assured Mrs. Lear that his door would remain open to her. We'll talk about it until the cows come home and beyond. Furthermore, he assured her that he would work toward obtaining the official positions of the IRS and the DOJ on the petition for relief of grievance, which was the 537 questions. Isn't that kind of like the group that wanted to meet with the head of Treasury and the IRS in Washington for like months, years, and they never met and kept getting put off, and it's irrelevant and immaterial. Congressman Hoekstra told her he sent letters to both agencies requesting answers to the questions within 30 days. That's going to happen. However, it is almost certainty that their responses will just be more evasiveness and skirting around the issues. Even though Mrs. Lear has now stopped the hunger strike, her efforts toward redress of grievance will continue. She intends to take the fight, got to stay in war, back to Michigan, her home state, and pressure elected government officials around the country to get official answers from the IRS and the DOJ. It's painfully obvious that the government isn't going to give straightforward answers until public knowledge and effort reaches a certain critical mass to effect changes. So we need a physical revolution, man, to get the law to work. Is that what they're saying? Yeah, come out of the matrix, that'll affect it. The government's agenda, supported by the intentional misapplication of the federal income tax system, so now the whole system is illegal, unlawful, and screwed up, is facing an ever-increasing threat of collapse as we move toward that event. They've been saying this now for about, what, at least a couple hundred years, ever since, like, the Revolutionary War, which never accomplished anything. Okay, however, until that time comes, the IRS and DOJ will continue to inundate the public with propaganda. Well, if they're at a war, what are they going to give them? War propaganda. Makes sense to me. And attempt to censor, vilify, and instill fear in people who dare speak the truth. Therefore, Mrs. Lear and the We the People organization that supported her throughout her deal will continue their efforts toward public education and awareness. Mrs. Lear's parting message to her congressman was, we're not going away. We're just going to keep fighting until we're all dead. Next part of that article is the one I was really interested in, is Dave Hinkson, and I've known him. He's a really good guy. He's part of the old patriotic fight team fight, and he needs to get up to date and understand what's going on. Dave is a brilliant guy. He just needs to see a little bit more of the picture. Dave Hinkson shares details on the IRS FDA raid. For this week's newsletter, we have some news and commentary from Dave Hinkson in Idaho to share with our readers. He has been rather aggressive over the years at defending himself from the bureaucrats of various agencies, including the IRS, FDA, and Bureau of Land Management. For those people that don't know him, Mr. Hinkson seems to be an intelligent and religious man who is very knowledgeable in the law. Oftentimes, when we listened to him speak over the years, he would tell some very interesting stories that were quite amazing, to say the least. He has a company in Idaho called Water Oz, which mainly sells some excellent health-related products, so we've been told. If you are into alternative medicines and health practices, then you'll want to visit the Water Oz website at www.wateroz.com. W-A-T-E-R-O-Z. Lowercase, no spaces. In the December 3rd, 2002 edition, the Tax Truth newsletter, we had an article describing a vengeful IRS raid on Mr. Hinkson's home and business. The raid occurred after Mr. Hinkson had filed a $50 million lawsuit against a U.S. prosecutor and IRS agent who had been harassing him. It's not too often that we get to hear from Mr. Hinkson personally, but a couple of weeks ago we were fortunate enough to have him speak to us again. We were able to get some first-hand updates on the outcome of that raid and other topics of interest. Mr. Hinkson talked about how a group of armed, masked men kicked down the door to his home early one morning. They dragged him out of bed, took him to a federal court after agents from the IRS and FDA ransacked the place. When he appeared before the judge, Mr. Hinkson told him that he felt he had been kidnapped. He explained that he had a pending $50 million civil case against the same persons who orchestrated the raid, but that he didn't accept their, quote, settlement offer, unquote, of trying to kill him. Anyway, in reference to the case at hand, the judge asked Mr. Hinkson, "How do you plead?" Mr. Hinkson's response was that he didn't understand the nature and cause of the case. Isn't that what patriots were doing about 3 years ago? Oh, I don't understand plain English. Therefore, the judge said he would plead for him, to which Mr. Hinkson replied, "Well, good. You're my lawyer then." In short, Mr. Hinkson was charged with 43 felony violations of federal tax and drug laws, which could have subjected him to large fines and substantial prison time. However, the judge released him on his own recognizance with no bail or bond requirement, to which the prosecutor complained in protest. What did the judge just do? Honored him. If he's out OR, then he's basically the offender. And so far, he's in control of the case. He didn't plead yet. He didn't accept. He didn't return. But the judge let him out and said, well, let's put him on a short leash of being the creditor and see where he goes. The government has a system designed to put just about anybody in prison as a political prisoner. You bet. All you got to do is what? Dishonor, and you can go to jail on anything. We don't need charges. We can accuse you of dropping apple peels, and if you can demonstrate you're a dishonorable person, you can go to jail for contempt. It doesn't make any difference what we're charging you with. Okay? For emphasis, Hinkson cited a quote from a senator who once said that the government could indict a ham sandwich if they wanted to. It's true. There are all these patriot-minded people who have various, quote, silver bullet protections, unquote, that they think are going to work, Hinkson said. However, one by one, many of them just end up in prison when the government prosecutes them. He asserted that this system employed by the government is very flawed. What's that mean? They never do anything right. Well, we knew that from the beginning. They don't have an indictment. They don't have a valid complaint. They don't have anything. So what? What's that got to do with your being dishonorable? They got jailed. That's one thing they got, yeah. And they got an army to help you go there. He asserted that the system is very flawed, but it does a very good job for them. Why? Because all of us are dishonorable. Yeah, we want to fight. In Mr. Hinkson's case, the search warrant the feds had was never file stamped. Oh, there you got it. So they can't prosecute me because they didn't file stamp the cotton picking warrant. And it didn't bear a court seal. Oh, that's problem number 2. And there was no affidavit to it. There it is. 3 strikes, they're out. He's home free. These are all procedural things that must be done in order for a search warrant to be valid according to the government's own rules, Hinkson says. So let's charge them with their own rule violation. Okay? Mr. Hinkson filed his $50 million lawsuit in April. Well, if they're doing everything wrong, let's go out and charge them. Let's sue them for $50 million for doing things wrong. So he filed a lawsuit in April of last year after the U.S. prosecutor and the IRS agent made concealed efforts to make him a statistic of this flawed system. So they gave him an opportunity. He probably dishonored, so now he's kicked at them. They orchestrated over 12 grand jury tribunals in an attempt to indict him. Mr. Hinkson said there were all sorts of lies told about him. There you go, Caleb. Watch them lies. Ooh boy, gotta fight them lies. Told about him during those tribunals. For instance, people said he was the head of a militia. Oh, man. According to Victoria, the only witness they've got against her in the trial that probably isn't going to happen in California because they finally accepted her plea of guilty so that they can release her, was some lady that was going to come in that was going to describe what the definition of patriots that were constitutionalists. Their lawyer was going to come in and describe to the jury what a constitutionalist was. And that was the state's big prosecution witness against Victoria. No facts, but they were going to describe what a constitutionalist was because the prosecutor kept saying that whatever it is, and we'll get that witness to tell the jury, is what the prosecutor kept saying Victoria was. So that was it, man. They were going to really lay her away. For instance, people said he was head of the militia, he murdered people, he buys and sells machine guns. What were they charging the people down at Waco with? Same thing? Does that mean it's real? No, that just means that the people in Waco dishonored the government too when they started getting called names. Basically, the government tried to trash his character. And we all know how we should fight for that, right, Caleb? Absolutely. You can't have a bad character, man. That's because if he ever went to trial, then potentially he would not be able to defend himself with the law for reasons that will be explained later. Then, upon going to court, the government would bring an enemy that he has, every enemy that he has ever made in to testify that he's a murderer and a plunderer and a machine gun dealer. Yet, to the prosecutor's dismay, the grand jury did not issue an indictment. Evidently, that made the prosecutor and IRS agent very angry because they wanted to get Mr. Hinkson. Therefore, they supposedly convened a second grand jury to issue an indictment that the first one would not issue. It was in this second grand jury that the United States prosecutor and the IRS agent decided they would just quote from memory what was said during the first grand jury, according to Mr. Hinkson. He said they had 4 agents who got this second alleged grand jury to indict him within a half hour. However, he obtained a copy of the alleged grand jury's true bill, which had only one person's signature on it. For reference, a true bill is the formal criminal charge returned by a grand jury upon issuing an indictment against someone as evidenced in the handbook of the federal grand jury, and then he describes the handbook, which says it's got to have 12 signatures minimum or 12 minimum out of the grand jury, or else it's not a grand jury indictment, and they've got to vote in favor of it, etc., etc. Since there was only one person's signature on the true bill, Mr. Hinkson believes that the prosecutor forged the indictment because there was no second grand jury. As a result, he believes that he was not indicted for the crimes the U.S. prosecutor and the IRS agent claim he committed. So what? It's irrelevant and immaterial anyway. They can't charge you. There's no law. Isn't that what they said? There is no law. Right? Caught you sleeping, didn't you? Wake up, Bob. I know. I'm trying to put you to sleep or wake you up. Okay. Yet nobody ever asked to see a copy of the required 12 of 16 signatures that had to appear on the true bill except for Mr. Hinkson. He claimed that he is the first person in the history of Idaho to ever ask for such a copy showing that all the grand jurors signed and voted. That's important because he said there's a U.S. Supreme Court case ruling that says if an indictment doesn't have at least 12 notarized signatures, then it is void. Well, you can put in a negative averment to rebut the presumption, but why are you arguing any of this stuff? It's irrelevant and immaterial. It's just a test. Furthermore, Mr. Hinkson also asked for a copy of his referral as well as the grand jury minutes and transcripts in between the tribunals that would show how many grand jurors there were. He received some of the transcripts, but he didn't get everything requested because they supposedly don't exist. They can't produce these documents after the fact unless they have 16 co-conspirators and a Pitney Bowes machine key set. The alleged phony indictment from the questionable second grand jury was returned on July 18, 2002. Yet the U.S. prosecutor had it sealed until November of 2002 because he